Up staircase when we finish and find out a lot more about the life of Dr. Nick Salese. Yeah, I said to Calvin, shall we go outside and get a picture of the place before we leave? He said, yeah, when it warms up to 45. We were looking at the thermometer in this car coming up over the mountain, and it said 41, 41, 41. As I left work this morning to come up here, a lady said, are you crazy? You don't have a jacket on? I said, no brain, no pain, no problem.
It's going to be goodbye to the annuals. Coming from a florist family, I'm always very saddened when I see the petunias, salvia, and impatiens all die off. But that's the cycle of life.
And you know what? We wouldn't trade those four seasons for anything up here in the Adirondack region.
No.
This is a beautiful home. I don't know how many of our viewers might have been to Ausable Acres at one time or another. Very interesting concept when this development first started. And Nick told me as we walked in, there are now about 400 homes, right?
That's correct. Some are just vacation homes or little A-frames.
Some of them are getting to be a little longer.
More year-rounders, more and more.
But this one started as one of the A-frames.
This one started as a small cottage that we were going to spend summer vacations. And then I got a lust for building, and I went berserk. Slow but sure, money was the object. So a tiny little cottage became perhaps the largest one in the acres. I know that my assessed valuation is higher than just about anyone, but I'm also on the highest spot in the acres, which is a curse and a blessing. A blessing because we get the rarefied air, but a curse because sometimes it takes a little longer for the water to reach the sink.
But you built it with your own hands.
I built it with my own hands with the on weekends over a 15 to 20 year period with a little help from Dick Champagny, who just deceased, and he certainly did the roof. I don't go to those heights. I'm not one of those Indian skyscraper boys that put up the Empire State.
Oh, boy.
So we're enjoying our house. We didn't intend it to be a year-round home, but fiscal exigencies of my son, we gave our home on Long Island in Syosset to our son Russell, and he's happy there, and I'm very proud of him because he married a young girl that was a battered bride who had two young kids in school, and he's taking care of these as if they're his own, and we were happy to give them a wonderful house.
See all the connections. I lived in Oyster Bay for a long time, which is just down the road from Syosset. So,
well, for 25 years, in order to make some ends meet, I was the executive director of the Syosset Chamber of Commerce.
See that?
And when I wasn't doing that and had some time, I worked for 3 years. I was a trustee of the Board of Education, a trustee of the Syosset Locust Grove Woodbury School District. And it was a historical time. We put up, we constructed 13 schools.
Did you really?
A senior high, huge, 2 junior highs, and 10 little community elementary schools.
Yeah.
Which was smart because when they didn't need the schools any longer, some of them were wiped out. And they made more money on real estate than you could imagine.
So let's talk about this Wall of Fame as we go up here.
Back on Long Island, all of this material was under my bed.
Oh, really?
Under the bed. And I said, when I get to this new home we're going to have here in the Adirondacks, I'm going to display them on the staircase.
I still got boxes under the bed. I don't even know what the heck is in them.
It's I call it the Wall of Shame. This first one is a gift from my wife for Valentine's Day, and it's got a wealth of biographical history here. There's a medal that I received as a student for being the outstanding Pan American student at St. John's University. It's the Pan American Medal. And then I have one right here in the center. It's the Dante Medal. I was president of the American Association of Teachers of Italian, even though I taught Spanish. I never taught Italian. I am Italian, but never taught it. I guess I was the first one that didn't teach Italian. Now, this is from the Cultural Division of the Italian government. It's given to educators throughout the country, and I'm very proud of that.
Nice.
And then there is the Pietas Medal of St. John's University. That's given for dedicated service. I was a professor for 40 years in the foreign language department was chairman of foreign languages for a while, and then became chairman of the Division of Latin American Affairs. The other medal was a medal that was given to me for on my 50th anniversary of my graduation from St. John's. And at the same time, they picked a distinguished alumnus of that group, and I got the medal for being the distinguished alumnus of my class.
Wonderful.
It was the class of 43, but I graduated in 42 with an accelerated program. That I will discuss later with you when we talk about the GI Bill.
Yeah.
These are my war medals. The Conspicuous Service Cross is a New York State given to veterans with honorable discharge in the state of New York, and we improved it a bit while I was the Director of Veterans Affairs. This is the European Theater of Operations Medal. This is the Air Medal that I received on 25 heavy bombardment missions over Nazi Europe. And then, of course, the theater ribbons. These are my bombardier wings. I was a bombardier on a B-17 with the 8th Air Force.
I love it.
We move up here. We're doing this randomly. There's no rhyme or reason on how they're put here. But St. John's College was originally in Brooklyn, on in Lewis and Willoughby Avenue, and they formed an organization of all the alumni from that group, and I was each year they honor one of those people, and this is my honor. Being
That's
part of
11
that.
years ago already.
Right.
On D-Day, too, June 6th.
That's right. Now here, we're going to talk later about Boys State. Oh, maybe it's a good time to do it now. The American Legion runs a wonderful program called Boys State.
Sure do.
And I am, or had been, the director of that program. And I hold a unique record in the American Legion. I have not missed a Boys State program as counselor for 52 years.
I love it. Isn't that great? What a record.
I was selected to go to Boys State as a 16-year-old, and I ran for assemblyman and got the job. Then I decided to throw in my lot to become the state comptroller. I lost by 1 vote.
Did you really?
But it's the best thing that ever
Now,
happened
your
to
wife
me.
didn't vote against you, did
Well said. I am absolutely thrilled by the fact that I did lose that election, for the simple reason that each time I ran for office, at any time, and thought that I was going to win, I worked a little harder to be sure that it wouldn't be another repeat. This was given to me by the Board of Trustees for Distinguished Service at the university, 40 years of time. We look up ahead here, we see a distinguished gentleman. This is my wife's father, my father-in-law, and he was one of New York's finest, Joe Buckley, a good Irish patrolman in the city of New York. Well, in Whitestone, where we lived, if you were Irish, you got a job with the police department or the fire department.
Sure.
And if you were Italian, like my family, you were lucky to get on the Department of Sanitation. All right. My pretty young wife in her childhood days.
Hold on a sec.
Okay. Well, that's your wife in younger days. What a beautiful spot that is, huh? Okay, next.
Now, I use the word pretty, the adjective, because I was always a man that sought pulchritude. I was anxious to have a pretty wife, and I think she was she was the prettiest girl in Whitestone. I can prove that because she was a runner-up and then finally made it as the Miss Rheingold, a beer contest. Pat was a professional model for Harry Conover Agency,
Oh, yeah.
and they had 6 girls selected, and you would vote on one of the 6 girls, And
I
they're
don't have to sing the jingle now, do
No,
I?
no,
I sang
no.
it to him. We sang it together on the
right.
phone.
And these 6 pictures hung in bars and taverns all over the city of New York. And I said to her, yes, I know you. You hung out in every bar.
I love it.
This is a picture of the staff at Boys State. You can see there are almost 80 men, and they dedicate 1 week of their lives to teaching young people government. Unlike so many programs for youth, it's not for the disadvantaged, which is a wonderful thing, but it's for those that excel, for the superior student. And we in the American Legion feel that they did a terrible thing to the curriculum when they eliminated American history. And we do the political history of the state, and we teach these boys what government really is. Now, learning by doing, it's a concept where they actually become an apprentice in government. If you think hard, and remember, President Clinton walked into the Boys State in Arkansas. He went with his musical instrument, saxophone, and he was going to play in the Boys State Band. And he just spent 1 day in the band and was seduced by politics, threw his instrument aside, and ran for governor of Arkansas and made it. If you remember any of the campaign literature, you see him in a Boys State outfit shaking hands with the president. In fact, he was the first one to shake hands, but being a charismatic figure that he was, the boys were lined up in alphabetical order at Boys Nation, and he just pushed the others aside. He's the letter C, and said, "Mr. President, I want to be the first to shake your hand in the Rose Garden." This picture is a picture of a lady that owned the Yucca Loma Dude Ranch outside of Victorville in the Mojave Desert in California. When it was time to pin on wings, most of the young men had a beautiful model or a beautiful girl to do it. She wrote and asked me if she could have the honor of doing it, and I was happy to say yes. She had financed the canteen or USO in the town of Victorville for the cadets, and I was very proud. And then she invited me to her ranch, and here I met many of the personalities that we saw on the silver screen. Tyrone Power, Annabella, Shirley Temple, the whole Edward Everett Horton. I could go on and on and on.
Roy Rogers there? Roy Rogers lived in Victorville.
That's right, he did.
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah.
And she had a lot of Western gear. This is I have a better picture here. It's a tiny picture of my crew on their 25th mission. The 25th mission, like the Memphis Belle, designates that you're going to get an air medal. And it's perhaps the first time you have an opportunity to get a picture as a crew.
Tell us what the name of your plane was. It doesn't have anything to do with the modern lemon law either.
No, we actually were supposed to fly a plane from New York to Great Britain, the 8th Air Force. And for some reason, there was malfunction on our airplane, so we went across the seas in a vessel. Unhappy as we were, that was it. And my particular cruise ship, what do they call them in the Navy? Troop ships, I guess.
Or transport, yeah.
Had about 600 or 800 engineers, all black engineers, that were going over to repair one of the invasion ports on the French side in Normandy. So that's the way we got across. When we got there, we inherited a plane that already had been named. It was called Lily the Lemon. Lily the Lemon. They were going to call our plane Bombardier, B-O-M-B-A-E-A-R. We had a little flip the coin contest, and I won, but it never happened. This is a picture of Governor Cuomo in the yearly picnic that he has for the Department of Labor, for all the unions on Labor Day. at the mansion. There's a picture of Cardinal O'Connor, the Archbishop of New York, and I want to reserve my comments on him
Sure.
for later. Another picture of the governor at the time that I said that I would mention Stony Brook. I was the prime mover in getting a veterans nursing home on the campus of Stony Brook. Again, we're saving this. This is a compilation of our children's pictures. Mario is all over the place here.
I wonder why.
I wonder why is right. Well, let me start and tell
That's
you.
because you tweaked his cheek here.
Isn't that something? Actually, I was wiping off his lipstick, but I don't tell that to anybody. I tell him that, Governor, if you don't behave, fat chance. I thought this is very nice. He says, thanks for agreeing to serve, huh? Which is all
there
right.
you go.
Now we come to the other wall, huh? Should we get down below and work our way up again here? This, of course.
Okay, the other wall.
Okay, here we are. This is a potpourri of all kinds of things. This is a medal, a plaque that I received from the Vietnam Veterans of America. And they actually put on one of their theater ribbons for me and made me an honorary Vietnam vet. The certificate of appreciation here is from Boys State again. This is a certificate in appreciation for contributions and support of the Air Force and the Air Force Academy. The American Legion has constantly honored me. I was the first captain of the Sons of the American Legion of Edward M. McKee Post in Whitestone. And as I told you, at 16, I went to Boys State. And after that, I became a counselor and worked my way up to being the executive director. And, of course, this is a thank you. This is Private Nick Salese. Private
Taken
Nick
last
Salese.
Tuesday, right?
Yeah, 121773731.
Of course.
All righty. Another American Legion Award. Whereas Salese has provided unselfish and dedicated service to the American Legion Boys State. Boys State is practically half my life. This is the way to get a Purple Heart. This is the easy way. Somebody gives you an honorary Purple Heart. It's not really the Purple Heart, but they're saying thank you for your service to wounded veterans. And I appreciated that. This is young Salese in high school. A late bloomer, I might add. My wife decided to give me a Great Lover Award. I never lost it.
Should we spend a lot of time on that one?
No, let's skip
okay.
over it fast.
Okay.
All right. Each year we had a Valentine's Day celebration at the Veterans Nursing Home in Albany, and this is Miss New York State. And of course, you know, she went to lifted up my trouser legs and blah, 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 and kept the veterans happy. Again, we'll talk later. This is what you get when you become a member of the governor's cabinet. Commissioner. This is my passport to political fame.
I love it.
We see Mario and Nick Salese here at the dedication of the Vietnam Memorial Museum in Albany, right next to the Supreme Court building. Right here. I suppose if you asked me which of these pictures do you treasure most, it would probably be this certificate of honor and my crew. This is yours truly right here. There's Lily the Lemon above. John Vischer was an extra in Hollywood, a very handsome lad. Clint Sager was our navigator, and Bob Hemingway was the pilot of Lily the Lemon. These are the officers, and all these gentlemen behind are the gunners. This is the long list of my missions. It's 34, but they gave me special orders to go to London and do propaganda broadcasting, and they called it the 35th mission. Frankly, I worked like hell, but it's a lot easier to get in front of a microphone and not have to face the flak. Matilda and I grew to, well, I knew Matilda as a student at St. John's University. And
Matilda Cuomo's wife.
Matilda Cuomo was Matilda Raffa, and her father had the contract for all of the military uniforms for the Northeast. And they had a few bucks in their family, but poor Mario was as poor as I was. And one day he came to me and he says, "Do you know a rich Italian girl?" I shouldn't be saying this off the record. I said, "Yeah, I know a few of them."
But that's been on the record. You're the one that told him the other data, right?
Yeah, that's right. So anyway, I said to him, by the way, I says, she comes in at 4. Some of these girls all come in at 4 o'clock. They're all apprentice teachers, and after school is over, they show up at St. John's and they're working on their bachelor's and master's degrees. I'll introduce you to a few. We'll talk about Matilda later.
And the rest is history.
The rest is history.
As they say, yeah.
My first degree is here. It's a bachelor's degree. And then I have a master's degree, which I don't know what happened. It's not here. And then I picked up a second master's degree right here, and then a supervisor of Spanish, and finally a doctor of education. Look at the size of the bachelor's degree. Look at the size of the That's the law of diminishing returns, I suppose.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of this one. Each year, the directors of Veterans Affairs of all 50 states meet in convention, and it's a different city each year, and we were in Atlantic City on this one occasion, and I was sitting there waiting to see who would be selected as the outstanding director of Veterans Affairs for the United States. I had no idea or entertained any thoughts that I would be a candidate. But somehow, someone said, they just called out your name. You better go up to the front. I think you're the recipient of the award.
And you didn't have a clue?
Well, I didn't have a clue because he didn't use my name. He says, "Will the professor please step forward?" And I probably wasn't paying attention, and he yelled again. He says, "Are you Professor Salese?" And I said, "Yes, I am." "Well, would you please come up here and get your award?" Well, he took me off guard. This indicates the work that was accomplished during the Como regime. I shouldn't use that, Como administration.
There you go.
We produced 58 veteran bills, more veteran bills in 1 or 2 year period than the entire history of New York State. And for that, I got the Melvin Dixon Award for that bit of work. And that's yours truly over there, sitting at my office, working feverishly to improve the lot of the veterans in this fine state, the Empire State. And every single veteran organization had honored me in the state, and I was very proud to represent them and to do what I could to make the life of the veteran easier, especially those that were wounded and required our aid. This is an interesting piece. There are
Let me
many.
get over there next to you. Okay.
There are many of our honorably discharged veterans that, for some reason or other, either become homeless or wind up in the prisons of our country. Sad but true. I decided that some of them who had not completed their college education might want to dedicate their time behind penitentiary fences, maybe doing some correspondence work, and I set up a program for them to complete their college education. And for that I got this award. Sadly, after I left office, maybe it was lack of monies, but I don't know what. We started at Camp McGregor down below, and it spread to all the others. I went up to Dannemora as well. In fact, the the veteran prisons at Dannemora presented me one of those huge American flags that you see at Automobile Agency, too big to hang in a home. This is yours truly and Pat, my wife, at the wedding of our first son, Douglas. We're very proud of Douglas, as we are of Russell, the boy that I had mentioned earlier. Douglas had also been a Boy Stater with no help from me, and he joined the Allstate Insurance Company, and because he was a student in communication, a new field, and at St. John's they didn't have a faculty, so what they did is simply send the young students to NBC and CBS, and they did on-the-job training. He got a thorough education in communication arts, and the Allstate people recognized that when he saved them $500,000 on telephone conferences. He got a 4-page spread and picked out as the Employee of the Year for the Allstate Corporation. So at that point, he was moved to the corporate headquarters in Chicago. He didn't like that area at all because he had a sick child that had an aneurysm in her brainstem and had to be back in New York. So at that point, he went to work for the power company, Lilco, and then from Lilco, he was picked up by the Cablevision outfits. Now, I went through all this to show that when the trade towers saw their doom, he, along with the other executives in Cablevision, set up a benefit program at Madison Square Garden and invited all of the musical groups and politicians and anyone that was interested to perform. And of course they had that huge extravaganza to make some monies for the widows and their children. And he was in the back staging this. Now Madison Square Garden is also the property of Cablevision, as is Radio City and the like. This is my son and his family.
Let's move over a little bit so
two
Calvin
children.
can get in here. Oh, what a nice family.
All righty, this is the girl, and it's the boy. That's Jason and Christy, and Douglas and Russell, and my wife, and my daughter-in-law.
Great family.
Yes,
Wonderful.
the Bauer.
I love it.
Good mixture.
Okay.
All righty, now.
I'm not sure if it's up to 45 degrees or not, but we're outside, up on the second story on the deck. What a beautiful place. You told me off in this direction is Whiteface Mountain.
That's correct.
A long time ago, you had a clear view before these trees had a habit of growing up on you, didn't they, huh?
Absolutely true. We had a devil of a time trying to create a circular driveway. That is why I have an all-wheel drive now, so the van can make it with little difficulty. It's nice being here in the woods, the northern sector of the state. We just love the air and we love the atmosphere, and this time of the year, nature really outdoes herself.
She really does.
Yeah.
Yep. This is people who don't. There are lots of places on the face of the earth that don't have leaves that change. And those people who have never seen changing leaves in the fall and sung all those wonderful songs about autumn leaves, have never visited the North Country, have missed something that we cherish every year up here, don't they? Huh?
Yes. Well, as the trees grew and I no longer could see Whiteface, I cleared out a portion here now, and from our Florida room we can
Yeah, sure. You can actually see that.
We
in
can
that
see
direction.
that. Actually, for the 3 months a year, under doctor's orders, we have to skip out of here and miss all of the revelry that goes with skiing, etc. And we go to Destin in the Panhandle.
Oh yes.
Yeah, in that area of the world. And That's the place that people drive to in Florida.
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah. Actually, it's the home of the largest Air Force in the Air Force facility in the United Eglin Air Force
right,
Base.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, this is nice out here. Let's go inside and continue this wonderful interview with Dr. Nick Salese. We're upstairs in Nick's favorite room in the house, right, Nick?
That's correct. Huge cathedral ceiling, all Douglas
I love
fir.
it. What a great room.
Yep.
If this doesn't typify the Adirondacks, nothing does. I love it. He's got something in his hand that's near and dear to him. Tell us all about it.
I served as a Director of Veterans Affairs from 1983 to 1988. And in 1988, I guess it was time to step aside and let the young Vietnam veterans have their turn at Veterans Affairs. I submitted my resignation, ready to retire for the second time, and submitted the resignation to my former student, the governor of New York State, Mario Cuomo, and he tore it up and says, "You'll always be on my team," and appointed me a member of the New York State Unemployment Insurance Board.
Oh, yes.
And I served in that capacity for 6 more years. This was very important to me because working in a Catholic university, for God and country, is great, but one needs hospitalization when one retires. And not having it, state service gave me that opportunity. But of course, I had to put in the necessary 10 years. Mario must have known that because
Of course he did.
he helped out in that regard, and we're grateful to him for that. On my retirement, and by the way, I completed all of my studies in my major field of endeavor, foreign languages, and then decided I wanted to take a crack at law. So at the university one day, we received a mimeographed sheet of paper that said any professor may take any course he desires. So I shot the works and signed up for law school in the evening.
I love it.
So after a year and a half, the president of St. John's, Father Flynn, calls me into his office and says, there's a young man in the law school called Nicholas Salese. That couldn't be you, could it? I says, yes, it is. Well, how the devil did you swing that deal? I says, well, here's the letter from, signed by you. Oh, reminds me of that Steinbrenner ad that you see with Derek Jeter, you know?
Way too many times.
Yeah. So, I say that because the job as the a member of the Commission on Unemployment Insurance, each one of us is an administrative law judge. So when good old Father Flynn promoted me to associate professor at that time, he gave me courses that competed with law school. This is a backdoor wipeout. So in spite of that, I still became an administrative law judge. So on separation from that job, a final and last retirement, my crew stayed up half the night. They purchased a kit, and they built this so that it'd be ready in the morning. They wanted to present me with a B-17 that I flew at World War II.
Now, as a bombardier, where would you have been in that plane? Just give us
Right smack here in the nose at 12 o'clock high.
No kidding.
That little greenhouse that you see there. In fact, on one of the missions, coming back, we had some problems with oil pressure, and this particular engine started to smoke and was on fire. And we didn't know whether the entire plane would be encompassed with the flame. And luckily, a fighter plane came by and buzzed all around us. He couldn't talk to us because of radio silence. and he held up a package of Lucky Strike cigarettes. And that was my clue or cue that our plane might make it. But
I love it.
Yeah.
What a story.
Yeah.
Lucky strikes.
A lucky strike.
Lucky devils.
yes, so the pilot was afraid that when he feathers a prop means that you turn the direction of the propeller blades so that there is no friction and you have more fire or create more sparks. But this one wasn't behaving. So we left the greenhouse nose because the bombardier and the navigator both sit in that compartment. We left and went back into the radio room, and we're all set to bail out because this thing didn't look like it was going to go back to the chalk cliffs of Dover. And we were still over enemy territory. Well, sure enough, the propeller broke loose. This was our most hairy mission, and sliced off the entire nose
Oh, give me
of
a
the ship.
break.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
God you were out of there.
And when we got back, they had already given us up for dead, missing in action. In fact, all of our clothes had already been packed. I had a bicycle that disappeared.
Oh, man.
So if you looked at that plane, you'd say, how the devil did it get back? We were going to land at Switzerland,
So it
but
was more lucky than lemon, wasn't it?
it was. But most people don't realize when you land in a neutral country, they have to fire at you as you're coming down to prove their neutrality. That's
No, I
weird.
never heard that
Yeah,
before.
yeah, well, that's what they did in Switzerland.
You gotta be kidding me.
So we tried our best and we made it.
That's wonderful.
Earlier in our conversation, I mentioned the trade towers. Now, let's go backwards. Some time ago, I got word from people that were close to Tom Brokaw that he wanted a bombardier to write his experiences in World War II as part of that Greatest Generation compilation that he's done, and this man deserves great credit for this project.
Absolutely.
He
And for
he does-
saluting World War II veterans
right,
in
he
general.
doesn't take any of the royalties; they're all contributed to charity. And I said, let me do that. I said, there are about 1,200 to 2,000 of us dying every day. In about 2 weeks, I'll be 81 years of age, an octogenarian to be sure. And let me write about my experiences. And I started first by compiling a list of all my missions, and I kept a diary while I was a bombardier.
You're really great.
And I had the diary and went to it and wrote up the 34 missions. I called it Bombs Away. But then the thought occurred to me, that's fine for the menfolk in our society, but after 2 or 3 of these bloody missions, and I'm using the word both as the English do and
Yes,
and
sure.
in
In
the
the
true
literal
sense,
sense, yeah.
right? I would want to jazz up the writings just a bit and maybe make it autobiographical. So I now call it Bombs Away in the Nick of Time. And of course, yours truly is Nick. And I added the whole story of my life in here. This is your life, Nick Salese, as a bombardier. I put the final period on this about a month ago, prior to the arrival of a couple from Great Britain. While I was in East Anglia, it's the southeastern sector of the British Isles, tracts and acres of land that are dedicated to sugar beet cultivation, which means that they're very flat and very suitable for runways for air bases. While there, I took advantage of every opportunity to go into London because I was a dancing fool. I really enjoyed dancing, and probably because of my studies in Latin America, especially the Latin dances of Cugat and the rest. And, of course, I was a typical tourist. I went to the meat market at Piccadilly to observe the ladies of the night and did not partake. It wasn't my cup of tea or elsewhere. And then went to Big Ben and Westminster Abbey and Tower of London and all those wonderful things that are available in London. One day I went to a church on the outskirts of London, and the priest came out with his two altar boys and started the Mass with the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, they used to say in those days. And a buzz bomb dropped right over his head and wiped out the entire altar, chapel, and priest and two altar boys. And I was with an English wren, a girl from the service, and the concussion knocked us on our proverbial you-know-what, and we wound up out in the aisle, and I said, I really don't need London any longer. My sister had been trying for weeks and months to get me to visit the relatives of a young lady that worked with her. And I finally got up enough nerve to knock on the front door and say, here I am in Ipswich. Fortuitous for me, the gentleman, Harry Haken, was a schoolman like myself. Very conservative, and he didn't have any great love for Yanks, nor did he have any dislike. But having a congruent profession, we kind of hit it off nicely, and his wife was Scotch, and all her people were in America, her sisters, and she did her best to make the Americans comfortable. Yeah. And I made the Haken home my home away from home. And I decided that it'd be London no longer, it would be Ipswich. And they had a small canteen and provided me with the outlet that I wanted of dancing my silly fool head off. The Hakens treated me like a son. They gave me the key to the house. They had twins, Ian Boot, and his sister Mary. They were 16. We continued our Christmas correspondence with the usual yearly Christmas card. And last Christmas, I suggested maybe she might want to visit America. Well, lo and behold, she showed up here 2 weeks ago. I picked Mary up at the airport in Montreal with her husband, Ray, and Ray Lister. And Mary spent a delightful 2 weeks with us here and just left 2 days ago. And
isn't that wonderful? And yes, in the best of all possible worlds, we would have been here, but we were predisposed to do other things and couldn't make it. We would love to have met them. What did she think of your little spot in paradise up here?
Well, she was very, very pleased with it because she didn't want city life. She wanted to see the mountains in the country.
She got it.
And she got it, yeah. Let me give you a couple of anecdotes that refer to the Hakens. Number one, at Christmas time, I wanted to have a Christmas tree. And they said, you can't have a Christmas tree because the trees all belong to the crown. It didn't bother me. I was going to liberate a Christmas tree. So I got on my trusty bicycle in Ipswich and I traveled all around, and suddenly I had the twins with me. I spotted a beauty on a golf course. And I said,
come on, Nicholas, that's on a golf course?
On a golf course. I said, that's for me. We came here to help the British. The least they could do is pay me off with a Christmas tree. So I hopped over the fence, my trusty little axe, and I got busy chopping away. And suddenly I saw the youngsters leave and take off. Sure, there was a gentleman coming in his knickers and his plaid cap from the country club headquarters and walking over into my direction and says, what you doing, Yonk? I says, I'm cutting down a Christmas tree. Oh, I see. Merry Christmas, Yonk. And walks back to the country club.
Isn't that amazing?
And I put the tree on my shoulders, drove down the streets of Ipswich with one tree, a hand on one tree and the other hand on the handlebars, and we brought the tree home. Then I said, how the devil are we going to decorate this thing? Now, tinsel had gone to war. We called it chaff. We
That's right. Had forgotten that. Sure.
we dropped bushels and bushels of
Yes.
chaff,
Yes.
and it would flow through the air, and the Germans would shoot at the chaff instead of the B-17s.
Sure.
And that was great, so I liberated some chaff and put it on the tree, and the kids put the usual popcorn
What a
and
great
daisy thing.
story.
Now, they decided that we should have a very special meal, so the Hakens, for weeks and months, raised a rooster that they were going to behead and serve on Christmas Day. Well, I told you that he was a schoolmaster, and schoolmasters don't know very much about raising chickens. We did as a child, but he didn't. So he cuts the end of his finger off trying to butcher the chicken. And they couldn't find it, and they think that the chicken ate the end of his finger. So, because he spent his Christmas Day in the hospital, and of course none of the children would eat the...
Of course not.
No.
Oh, God.
They had invited my commanding officer to come, and
These stories are true, and he's sticking by him, you
my
know.
pilot was there, and oh no,
Oh,
I'm
I
sorry
know.
they're not here to tell you about it
No,
themselves.
We're kidding.
And he looked at the tree and he says, "That's a mighty fine tree." And of course, you know, the tinsel was classified. He says, "I especially like the decorations."
Yeah.
You know, then suddenly at Christmas Day, you know, the whole it's so sad to be in the service on Christmas. It's really very, very sad.
Yeah, we think about that every time, every year.
Yeah, very, very sad. Often I would show up ahead of time, loaded with provisions, and I started to cook, and one day the gas just went out, and I didn't know why. So I couldn't finish the meal for them. I'd prepare meals for them. And Mrs. Haken came in, Tess Haken, and said, "What's wrong, Nick?" I said, "No gas." "Oh, you didn't put a shilling in the geyser." I says, "What the devil's that?" "They have meters inside the house, and you have to drop in a coin,
Oh, my.
and it takes care of
Come on.
the hot water, and it takes care of the gas. And each month they don't have meter readers; they have coin collectors. They come into the house and pick up the coins and take off.
Isn't that amazing?
I
So you
really
dropped a shilling in and you were all right.
already back to normal again. Well,
Thanks,
anyway, on the this manuscript is loaded with limerick poetry. I really enjoy writing silly little primitive verse, and I decided to write a serious one for the trade towers, and probably because of the sadness that I experienced, one of my cousins lost his life in the Trade Center, and it was hard to swallow. I call it in remembrance of all those who lost their lives on September 11th, and I call it Sad Christmas 2001. It's not great poetry, but it comes from the heart. Christmas is a sad holiday this year. Few gifts, goodies, and holiday cheer. Happiness has changed to sadness this Yuletide season. International terrorism and fear are the prime reason. For many families, it will be a sad and bleak year, clinging to nostalgic memories and shed a tear. Magnificent architectural icons of funeral pyre, twisted steel, fallen stone, smoke and fire. Terrorists plot in subterranean caves and den, destroying any peace and goodwill towards men. Lives snuffed out in trade tower, professional careers in final hour. Valiant sacrifices of New York's finest, medics and firefighters, New York's bravest. Christmas tree, Santa, reindeer and mistletoe, replaced with flag-draped victims all in a row. Santa has exchanged his sled for a military plane to feed starving refugees on mountainous terrain. Once again, young men and women march off to war. We cherish our freedom, it's worth fighting for. United we stand, divided we fall. This is the cry of Americans all. There is a new patriotism in our beloved land. We're determined to wipe out the terrorist band. Americans proudly wave the American flag. It's a symbol of freedom. It's not a rag. The Congress and the President speak with one tongue. Aerial bombings, roar of Navy guns, carols unsung. Cousin Billy gone. Sad thoughts this day. We grieve for him. We meditate. We pray. Prayers for his kids, wife, sister, dad, and mother. Billy Gardner was one of a kind. There is no other. Always with a kind word and a happy smile. That was always Billy's personal lifestyle. Life must go on for all of God's blessed people. We shout peace from the highest church steeple. As we view the divine family in the Bethlehem stable, in some homes, an empty chair at the Christmas table. May the infant Savior, Prince of Peace, quiet all of our fears. Enjoy a blessed Christmas and many future happy New Years. Farewell, Cousin Billy. We shall never forget you. In loving memory of William Gardner, September 11, 2001. He wished no one a last farewell, nor even said goodbye. He was taken from our midst. Only God knows why.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing that with us, Nick.
Well, this took place, the place of my Christmas card that year.
Oh, boy.
I said that I had been in Boy State for 52 years, and last year a very wonderful thing happened. I walked into the convention hall, and I looked up at all of the placards, and the top placard is one of the 10 counties that's named after national commanders of the American Legion. And there are 3 below, and they are cities in the counties of Boy State. And I saw my name. They named a city after me at Boy State. Cities are named after state commanders. So they waived the rules after 52 years, and there is now a Salese city at Boy State.
Well, let me hold that up and you
Yeah.
can take a look at Calvin can take a look at it. I think that's really nice. What a fine honor.
Yep.
Great.
These are pictures of the Haken family, which, of course, are too hard to view.
Well, we can look at it a little bit because that's a wonderful story and what a great connection
Yes.
for you and to bring them over here to spend a couple of weeks.
Well, you did a wonderful program not too long ago on
An awful lot of
Belgium.
fun in Champlain. And
Yes.
It's important to tell those stories.
And that was one of the primary motivations in you and I getting together. It's just one
I
of
thought
those
you
nice
just wanted to
things.
call and say hello.
Well, I did, and I'm very fond of your writings because of their homespun quality. I want to say this. I started school unable to speak English. My parents were Italian immigrants. My father came first to join his brother who had a small florist business in Whitestone. And after a while, children appeared, his nieces and nephews, and there was no room for him, and they wanted him to get married and get out and provide some. So he decided that he'd go back to Italy because he promised his parents that one of the things he would do when he came to America and reap that gold that was all over the place, right?
Yeah.
He found out that wasn't true. But he saved enough money to go back and provide indoor plumbing for his folks. And while there, the sister of his sister-in-law lived in a neighboring town that's called Salle, S-A-L-L-E, because of the salt mines that were there in the Abruzzi province. It's probably the origin of the name Salese. Actually,
Makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
it certainly does, plus the fact that Roman legions were paid off with little bags of salt. And so probably my ancestors were finance officers in the Roman legions. But he got on his donkey and he went across this mountainous stream of the Orfenta River in a town is called Caramanico. It's near Pescara on the Adriatic side. And of course the only bridge was a huge tree split in half, and the donkey walks on these 2 logs, and there was this stroke of lightning, scared the hell out of the donkey, and passenger, my father, wound up in the roaring Orfenta River like the Orsabo River, I guess, in its worst. And all of a sudden, all of the dollars that he had saved are floating down the river, and my mother's at the water's edge because she lived in that vicinity. And she sees the dollars, and she hops in, and the two of them rescue all of his precious monies that he had saved. He was very fond of my mother, but he thought that that family had lots of money and his family did not. And the reason they had money is because her parents, or at least her father and her brother, came to the United States years earlier. And they were part of the railroad gang that built the railroad from Albany to Ravenna in New York State. And they went back and bought a few olive groves and a patch of ground here, another there. And he knew he didn't have a chance, so he never courted my mother, but he was very fond of her. He told her that he was on his way to get married, but he had never met the girl yet, but he was going to check her out, I guess. So he got there, and of course they hit it off very nicely. And he said, well, I'll be back next week with the priest and the best man, etc. And she says, what do you mean? Yeah, we're going to go to America. I'll have all the papers. No, she says, I can't go to America. I'm the last of 8 children, and I have to take care of my mother and father. Oh, you don't want to go to America? No. I'm sorry. We can't get married. Now, my father had a fear that he would be conscripted by the fascists.
Sure.
And he'd be stuck because once an Italian, always an Italian. Let me work backwards. Listen carefully to the dates and time. On November the 11th, 1918, a young man called Salvatore Salese was conscripted into the United States Army and appeared for service at Fort Totten in Queens. He raised his right hand on November 11th at 10:45 and swore to uphold and defend the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So help me God. Lowered his hand. And by the time he lowered his hand, all the church bells started to peal. The cannons were fired at Fort Schuyler and Fort Totten.
11 o'clock.
11 o'clock
The
and the
11th
war
hour.
was over. And I have the certificate
Unbelievable.
here. I have his discharge here in the
Isn't-
manuscript that proves it all. In fact, I
It's
have
got to be
it
the
marked.
shortest time for
It's
that.
probably Guinness's Book of Record job.
That's amazing.
But what's even more amazing, he got $65 mustering out pay in the year 1918. That was worth purchasing power of thousands.
Isn't it? What a story.
Got a silver AEF ring, American Expeditionary Forces. The most valuable piece of paper he got was American citizenship and an honorable discharge.
Isn't that amazing?
Great story.
November 11th.
Not only that, he was able to join the American Legion because he was a veteran, and I was able to join the Sons of the American Legion and become the first captain of the group in Whitestone.
Isn't it?
It's a great story, and we
Oh.
love it.
Oh, I love it too.
Yeah.
That's truly fascinating.
Well, on the way back, after bidding goodbye to a girl that he really didn't know, who didn't satisfy his mold, he meets my wife again, crossing that same spot in the river. It was a peaceful crossing, and she said to him,
Your mother, you mean? Met your mother?
well, it's my mother. Now
Yeah.
you got the end of the story. He met this girl that he was very fond of, Assunta.
Uh-huh.
And she said, well, did the girl accept? He says, yes, but she didn't want to go to America with me, so I couldn't arrange the deal. So my mother says, you offered her an opportunity to go to America, and she turned you down? My father said, yes. If I married you, would you take me to America? He jumped at the opportunity. So
Oh, man.
now she was a foxy girl.
I bet she was.
She had a sister who was living in East Brady, Pennsylvania, and she wanted to see the sister, and the sister had written to her and told her what a great country this was, and she was anxious to go, and she finally got her ticket to America. Pop had, well, they had the marriage in their little town, and the custom is for, on the wedding night, somebody would leave their premises, leave their house, and turn their house over to the wedding couple, and they would spend their honeymoon that evening in one of the homes. At 2 o'clock in the morning, there's a heavy rap on the door. This is my father's first night. And he goes to the door, and he's not too pleased, but one of his buddies is there, the telegrapher at the local railroad station. He said, Salve, he said, you better get the hell out of here. Those were his words. He says, because I got word on the telegraph that there's going to be a recruiting squad coming into this town to recruit all of the young men for service in the Italian fascist army. My father kissed his new bride goodbye at 3 a.m., got back on his donkey again, and traveled across the spine of Italy, arrived at the port. Luckily, the boat was in the harbor. The captain gave him permission to stay on board until for a week or so, and then come back to America. When my mother finally got her papers, she had a few bucks, as we said, and she came over first class, and she didn't know what it was like to be in the hold of a ship, like so many of these people that came over, immigrants that traveled like slave ships. Sad but true. So when she came into New York's harbor, she says, my, what a wonderful way to be greeted in America. The fireboats were shooting water. Rockets were going off. They were shooting cannon at Governor's Island. It was New Year's Eve.
Of course.
So my father got a little flat in Flushing. Flushing, by the way, was very near and dear to my father's heart because it was kind of a primitive agricultural center. Don't forget, this was the home of the Dutch, and New York was New Amsterdam. And some of those trees that these Dutch people had planted in those colonial days are still living in the Flushing area. This is the World's Fair area of 1939. Well, Pop could only afford this house near the gas house district. My mother came in, and because she came from the high Alps altitude, couldn't breathe that air mixed with this gas. And next morning she's packing her grip ready to go back, and said, look, she says, I love you, but I can't breathe. And besides, I don't like the people here. They're all Italians. If I wanted Italians, I would have stayed in Italy. My father had put her in an area that was a little ghetto, etc. He says, what do you mean? He says, I want to live with Americans. So Pop took a day off, great sacrifice in those days, and moved on to an expedition. Oh, he had a bicycle. He cycled all over creation, came back that night and said, well, he says, I found a home in College Point, he said, and that's 90% German. And he says, and I found one in a flat in Whitestone, and that's almost 90% Irish. So he said to my mother, you want to live with the Irish, or do you want to live with the Germans? Well, my mother's brother had been was an officer in the Italian army. He achieved a good number of promotions and died of mustard gas poisoning 1 week after World War I ended. And I guess she didn't have any love for anything German. So she said, no, I'll live with the Irish. And sure enough, we went to live in Whitestone. Now, I've got to say this. Just as the Irish suffered at the hands of the English in the early days, the Italians suffered at the hands of the Irish. The youngsters on the block were not permitted to talk to me. And besides, we'd have difficulty.
No kidding.
We'd have difficulty talking because I couldn't speak English. And you know what? There's another fellow that was in the same boat. Mario Como went to school not being able to speak English. And maybe it's because we went to St. John's that prided themselves on being the cradle of orators. But we dismissed our handicap, and we overcame it, and we both speak English without any difficulty.
The best part of it is he was your student.
Yes. Now, we're coming to that in a second here. A black limousine would pick me up in the morning, a La Salle, and take me to school. And pick me up in school and take me home. The neighbors were dumbfounded. These Italian people next door, they don't have hardly any money. They can't speak English. And a La Salle limousine with a chauffeur picks them up. Well, my father got a job with a French horticulturist who had 28 greenhouses in Whitestone. And when he first came to America, he brought a camellia plant under his arm. And he took that camellia plant and he nurtured it. And he put my father in charge, a 15-year-old boy. And my father kept making cuttings and cuttings, and now they have greenhouses full of camellias. He was the camellia king of America. He introduced the camellia to this country. It was Louis Dupy Greenhouses in Whitestone.
Great story.
It's a fantastic story. I mentioned my father riding on a bicycle. Well, usually parents, especially during the Depression, scrimp and save to buy an Elgin Bluebird to give their kids to find it under the Christmas tree. Well, in our family, there were 2 boys and 2 girls. Sal, my brother, my sister Lynetta, and my sister Bettina. We scrimped and saved so Papa would get a new bicycle under the Christmas tree.
That's great.
The Elgin
That's great.
Bluebird.
Yeah.
And as time went on, of course, we began to really realize how our parents worked so hard for us. What was this Black La Salle all about? Well, Louis Dupy had a granddaughter who couldn't speak English either. She spoke French. So in this limousine was this young girl, 5 years or 6 years of age, in my class at school, and the 2 of us were tutored. So as long as she was getting her ride,
You got it too.
I got my
Okay.
ride also.
I'm with you. Wonderful.
I'm sure they thought we were part of the mafia or something, but
That's amazing.
Abruzzes were not part of the mafia. That was the story. Well, anyway, in due time, I mastered the English language, and something that normally would be sad turned out to be beneficial and fortuitous for me. I stepped on a rusted nail of a gate post, and I got an infection at the bottom of my foot. And it traveled up my leg, and a huge tumor appeared in my groin, and I had septicemia, blood poisoning. And before Wonder Drugs, this was very serious. They operated on the dining room table and laid me up for at least 6 months. No friends, no children. I'd look out the window and stare at all my neighbors and classmates. But my mother, in her anxiety to keep me busy, stopped at the local library and picked up 5 books each week. She didn't know what she was getting. She'd bring home recipes, engineering books, math, etc.
You got a good variety.
Yeah. But anyway, every once in a while, the right one would show up. I read voraciously. And I was wheeled to the public school. I went to public school. We couldn't afford textbooks, so I couldn't go to a Catholic school. My father made $18 a week in the Depression. He never wanted to join the WPA. He'd rather starve than take a dole of any kind. And we read and read and read. And he took me in a wagon, he used to tie the wagon to his bicycle and pull it. I remember getting dumped on the railroad tracks one day. And we got into the 4th grade, and they decided that they wanted to take some of the better students and move them out because the 4th grade was too heavy. They had a 4A, 4B, 5A, 5B, and they skipped me a grade and put me from the 4th to the 5th, which meant that I was going to graduate from elementary school a lot sooner. Wouldn't you believe that one of the teachers who had a son in my class went down to the principal's office and complained like hell because this immigrant boy was being pushed along and her son, who was in my class, never made it. Well, we ignored her and moved up the ladder and let it go at that. I knew a little bit of discrimination. After they got to know us, and after they got to know Mom and Pop, we had a huge garden and supplied the entire block with tomatoes. We had 80 Rhode Island Reds and supplied them with eggs, and this was Depression time. Mama took care of the kids, and while they had to go off to the store or go to work or got sick. So we were readily accepted. And I guess I had to prove a point, so I married Patricia Buckley.
I love it. I love it.
The
And now she cooks all that good Italian food.
good
I love it.
Well, anyway, completing my elementary school studies, I went to high school. It was the first time Bayside High School had opened. I was the first of the 4-year class, and I was a late bloomer. I didn't do very much in high school. Actually, I had a nemesis. I feared mathematics. I used to get nightmares over mathematics. So I knew
A lot of kids do today, of course.
and I knew that I'd never make any honors list or ARIS or anything of that sort, but I got a decent grade. One day, while in high school, I continued my religious studies. I found theology fascinating. And even though I had made my first Holy Communion and confirmation, I continued to study with one of these nuns that had an advanced group. I went to confession one day, and I used to go to the pastor because he had a fast confession and let us get away with murder. And I walked in, and he said, for your penance, please see me in the rectory after the confession. I thought, holy God, beads of sweat. And what did I do? I think I remembered saying that I put my hand over her sweater. But that's about the worst that ever happened. So I walked into the rectory, and I'm wondering what the devil's going on. And he came in. He says, I want you to do me a favor. He says, I have a letter that has to be delivered to St. John's University. I don't know how it's got to get there by tomorrow, and I'm asking you to deliver it for me. And he slams the door shut and hands me the letter.
That was it.
That was it. Francis J. Dillon. He became Monsignor Francis J. Dillon, St. Luke's Church, Whitestone, New York. I had intended to go to City College of New York. Actually, my first application was sent into Queens College because Judge Colden, who was the prime mover in setting up Queens College, lived right behind my wife's premises. But that had just a small number. They were just starting off and they couldn't handle it. CCNY was packed, so it looked like it was going to be Brooklyn College for me. And that was a long trip. Well, I said, well, maybe I'll get used to going to Brooklyn. I'll take this letter to St. John's. Actually, I had missed the day that I would have to appear to talk to the academic advisor. I wasn't too happy about that. So I took the bus to Flushing. That was a 20-minute ride from Whitestone, and then another half hour to get to Bridge Plaza and down to Canal Street, then across the Triborough Bridge, and then over to Lewis and Willoughby. And I thought, oh my God, it's almost an hour and a half before I got to the college. I thought, I pitied the poor souls from Whitestone that have to go to St. John's.
Little did you know what you had in your hand, young man.
Yeah, I know. So I walked in and I showed it to the registrar, Fred Keenley, and I proceeded to walk out, and he comes running after me and says, Salese, come back here. Where are you going? I said, I'm going home. I delivered the message from my pastor. He said, is your name Nicholas Salese? I said, yes. He said, well, I have a piece of paper. You were registered 2 years ago. Your registration number is number 1. Get your ass upstairs to the 3rd floor, medieval history. You already missed 2 days of college. The pastor had paid for 4 years of my education at St. John's.
Think about that.
Now, I don't know whether he saw me, deeply interested in theology and thought possibly I was going to be a priest, and maybe he was helping me along in my career, but whatever it was, who knows. I thought about the priesthood for a short time, very short time because for me, the smell of incense was not as great as the smell of perfume. So
we get the picture.
yeah, okay. So I said, well, I've got to do something here in college to prove to this pastor that I was worthy of all of this money. So I knocked myself out in all kinds of extracurricular activities, tried to make a name. So this late bloomer, wilted lily in the high school area suddenly became gregarious, and as I said, St. John's prided itself on teaching people how to speak well, and we were all artists, including Mario. By the way, I keep mentioning Mario. A professor from Mississippi wrote a biography on Mario, and Mario was one of the keenest intellects that I had as a student at St. John's University. I had about 4 or 5 of them that I remember. One is the Supreme Court Justice Sprizzo, still on the bench, and the other was a fellow called Dick Nerod that became the head of the entire Latin American division of General Motors, a powerful person in the corporate world, and Tony or Anthony Sigismondi, a cousin of mine, who became the lawyer for Frank Borman, and the astronaut who was running Eastern Airlines, and Lou Ciardulo, whose parents owned a nightclub in Brooklyn, who was very versatile and very bright intellect. These few stand out in my mind. Now, Mario came up one day and handed me an assignment and said, here's my term paper. I said, Mario, you're a month late. I said, you're giving me that term paper in December. It was due a month ago. I says, I can't mark examination papers and read all of the term papers at the same time. You know you're going to be marked down a grade. He mumbled, went back to his seat. Well, sure enough, it was an A paper. He had Matilda type it out for him.
Did he really?
Nice and clean and neat. And I gave him a B+. It would have been an A if it would have been on time. He says, I was in the West there playing baseball. He was varsity ball.
He was a great ball player.
Great ball player. And he said, and you know, I said, Mario, the first day you walked in here, you knew the date that this was due, and you knew what the consequences and penalty. Oh, he made such a pest of himself, and I wanted to start the class. I said, sit down, I'll take the paper home, look at it again, and I'll see you on Monday. Monday he came in all excited. Did you read my paper? I said, yes, Mario. And on second reading, I didn't think it was so hot, I changed the B+ to B-.
B-.
Oh, he never got over
Many
it.
people got one up on Mario Cuomo.
He never got over it. Well, you know, when he sent the professor to my side so that I would give him a good testimony of what kind of a student he was. May I have the time to?
Sure.
Yeah, all right. Como was offered an athletic scholarship to Hofstra, but the coaches there wanted him to run track. He intended to play basketball and baseball and decided that he was better off accepting the scholarship at St. John's College. This way he wouldn't have to worry about what ball I want to play. So he continued his education. Well, what had happened is, let's go down. I don't want to waste too much time here. He's a man that had great retentive powers. He was, he pulled the same thing on me as a professor that he did with the reporters. When he could answer a question, he went to great lengths answering the question. When he couldn't answer the question, he turned to the reporter and asked a question.
Always.
And then he got them off on a
He
different...
did it to me on more than one occasion.
Yes, and he did it to me again and again. And suddenly I'd be lecturing on something else, and suddenly it dawned on me, this guy got me off the track because he didn't have the answer. Well, anyway...
It's wonderful. While you're looking, I got to tell an anecdote because we were interviewing Mario Cuomo on the steps of Plattsburgh City Hall. and he could not abide reporters who would ask convoluted questions. Make your question to the point, give me a chance to answer it, get on with the next question. And I will not name the reporter, a female reporter who doesn't live here anymore, who worked for a local television station. And she asked about a 24-part question that took her 5 minutes to get through. And he said, I'm not going to answer that. It's too complicated. And by the way, young woman, do you get paid by the word? She never said another word. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, all right. Mario comes up after class and says, you destroyed my medical career. He said, I was going to be a doctor and go to medical school, and now it's not going to happen. Well, it was an all-boys school, so it was easy for me to make my retort. It's right here in the book. The professor knew exactly how to characterize his student's assertion. Bullshit, Salese said. Now, of course, that spread all through Albany, which I was sorry for later. You're not going to medical school. You're on the varsity team, and you're going to big league ball, which is true. He went to the farm team down in Georgia, and he got hit I understand it was the first ball, hit him right in the head. And he went unconscious at home plate, and his father heard about it and got all excited. And when he regained consciousness, I don't know if the parents were there or not, but Mario was grabbed by the ears and said, I no send you to college to play ball. You go to law school. And that's how he wound up in law school, and of course he became a great law student. He was editor of the what is that, law review, I think they call it, huh? Mm-hmm. For the outstanding student. And of course he became the politician he is today, running against Koch for mayor and losing, and running against Koch for governor and winning. Now, across the street from my chalet was a gentleman that owned a plumbing supply business in Brooklyn. A huge place. And a retired colonel in the United States Army. And he came up to visit me here at the chalet and said, when Koch gets elected, I'm going to be the Commissioner of Veterans Affairs. I says, that's strange. I said, because when Como gets elected, I'm going to be the Commissioner of Veterans Affairs. Here we are, living side by side. Oh, you don't have a Chinaman's chance in hell. I said, well, I don't know about the Chinaman, but this Italian's going to make it. Sure enough, when Koch made the statement about people here in the North Country wearing gingham dresses and shopping at Sears and Roebuck, etc., that was his doom. And Mario made an effort to appreciate and respect the North Country. I remember when he came up to Malone or one of these places, and we used to travel and trail behind him. And before the open forum town hall meeting, they came up with 2 bushel baskets of harvest. Cauliflower and lettuce and tomatoes and carrots and beets, etc. And Mario's digging through peanuts and maple sugar. And one of the farmers said, what are you looking for, Governor? He says, I'm looking for the scarola, the favorite lettuce of the Italian people. There was no scarola up here in the North Country. Well, he made the mistake, I guess, of not heeding the needs of the North Country, as Pataki has done, and as the senator of New York, the Lady Clinton, right? He possibly would have made it. I guess, after such a huge plurality of votes in the election before that, he was almost sure, I guess, that he was a shoo-in. But it didn't work that way. Now, 2 years ago, Governor Pataki showed up at Boys State. And, of course, I introduced him. and we got to be friends for a day. And he says, I think I know you. I said, yes. I says, I was enjoying, I go once a year to the races down at Saratoga, and you came in searching for votes. And no, it was someplace else. He says, you're very familiar. He says, in fact, I think I associate you with Boy State. I says, that's where I've been all my life. He says, I was a Boy Stater.
Oh, no kidding. I didn't know
I
that.
said, you were? He says, yes, at Colgate University. I says, well, that's where I started. He was in my first Boy State at Colgate when I was just 8 He says, did they call you Doc? I said, that's it. That's me. I'll be damned.
Isn't that wonderful?
So I said, let's prove it. So when he made his speech 2 years ago, we both stepped up to the microphone and sang the alma mater of Boy State.
That's great. You know, you said before that you were on Cuomo's cabinet, but let's point out that you were probably the only Republican on his cabinet.
That's an interesting comment that you make, sir. I approached the governor and I said, why do you want me? I'm a Republican. He says, I want a Republican I can trust, so I can also say that I have a bipartisan cabinet. Let me tell you how I was appointed. That's a story in itself. Pat and I were invited to the inauguration. We waited 3 hours outside so we'd get a good seat. We get to the door, and I have a gold engraved invitation, and the guard says, what the hell are you doing out there for 4 hours? He says, you have a reserved seat on row 1. So we go to row 1, and Herman Badillo is on one side of me, and the mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico, is on the other side of me. And I guess he wanted me, this former Spanish teacher, to converse with them in Spanish. I had completed my work at St. John's. Well, let me just backtrack just for a moment, Gordy, all right? At the end of 2 years at St. John's University, I took all the credits that I could get because Uncle Sam was breathing hard on my back, wanting to conscript me. And of course, I wasn't paying the bill, and they used to be $5 a point. Can you imagine $5 a point?
Yeah, today?
Like $180 would get you through 1 year of college.
For $5.
$180 a year. I volunteered to pay the $40 activity fee, and even that was a hardship. So at the end of 2 years, while at St. John's, I was the big boy on campus. I arranged to have the junior prom at the Hotel Plaza at Central Park. I went up to the Glen Island Casino, and I met Glenn Miller, and he said, you've contracted with the Plaza? I said, yes. Well, he was just coming into his own at that time. If you have the Plaza, I'll play for you at a reduced rate. And he did. And we had Glenn Miller at the Plaza Hotel.
Oh, wow.
And I arranged for that. And then we arranged, after that, I decided to shoot the works, and we had another dance at the Cert Room of the Waldorf. And Steve Allen was brought in as an honorary member of Pi Alpha Sigma fraternity. They even had a little bit of discrimination on the campus at St. John's. If you were Irish, you could join Sigma Tau or Zeta Sigma Pi. Zeta Sigma Pi was interested in social studies. Sigma Tau was interested in English. All the Italians went into AID, which were Americans of Italian descent. I didn't particularly go for those ethnic groups, although very recently they invited me to be a member of the Italian club here in Plattsburgh. I attended their first meeting, and the next thing I know, I'm on the board of directors. Well, anyway, I decided to form a new organization and invite all ethnic groups to join. I started by calling it Pan American Society. It was the time of the Good Neighbor policy and Roosevelt, etc. PAS, Pi Alpha Sigma. We got our credentials as a fraternity, and it was full speed ahead. I was elected vice president of the National Association of Catholic College Students, and I would attend conventions and conferences along the main line in Philadelphia and met the Grace Kelly crowd. I'd have to save all month long to have enough money to make the trip, etc. So, lo and behold, my name comes to the attention of the Passionate Fathers in Union City, New Jersey, and they awarded me a scholarship to the University of Havana. They publish a magazine called the Sign Magazine, and I went to Havana as a scholarship student of the Passionate Fathers. It was subsidized by Monsignor Barry, the pastor of St. Patrick's Church in Miami Beach, and his brother, Bishop Barry, the president of Barry College for Women down in Florida. And I spent 6 glorious weeks at the University of Havana and actually brushed off any rust that I had in my linguistic preparation. When I got back to St. John's and went back for the fall semester, I still wasn't of age to be drafted. The dean, Father Meyer, calls me in his office and says, "You know, son, you're only a half a point away from a baccalaureate." He says, "What'd you do of an extracurricular nature?" Well, I enumerated all the things. He says, "Wait a minute, you mentioned the choral club. I can give you a half a credit for the chorus, being in the choral club." Well, I says, "You may have to," "No," he says, "I'll call Professor Rasmussen." He called him. He said, "Do you remember Salese?" "Yeah." "What do you remember about him?" "Well, he sang the first note, and I decided he couldn't be in the chorus. He can't sing." So I had him take the attendance and prepare the robes and do all of that. I was the, what do they call the guys that work behind the scenes, you know, off stage, etc. Props?
Yeah, stagehand.
Yeah, stagehand, etc. So the dean is saying to the professor, "Well, don't you think that's worth a half a credit?" "Well, no, he didn't really sing." Well, I guess they got a new professor of music the following semester, and and this guy was more understanding. So the dean reaches down into his desk and says, "Here, you have a fellowship for Niagara University, also owned by the Vincentian Fathers." So I went up for my master's in Spanish. They said, "Master's in Spanish? The reason you're here, son, is because our Spanish professor was drafted, and you're the Spanish department, and with your learnings in your education in Havana, you should do a fine job." So suddenly I found myself with a fellowship as professor of Spanish, Niagara University. I did that for a year and saw the classes dwindle, saw all my students disappear, and I got the end. I felt like a 4F walking down the street because when the students disappeared, Niagara University signed a contract with the Air Force, and all the cadets came in, and I taught public speaking and international relations as prescribed by the Army, with a mimeograph sheet showing up every day telling me that at 9 o'clock you start on this page, and at 10 o'clock you're on the next page, etc. I felt like a 4F walking down the street. So I said, "No, this isn't for me." So I gave up my exemption, and I joined the Air Force. But I didn't want to be a fighter pilot. Every young man that joins the Air Force wants to be a fighter pilot. I didn't want to be upstairs alone. When that flak hit, it got me in the arm or leg, I wanted to have somebody there to help me bandage my wounds and get back. Well, I had one hell of a time trying to prove that, because I was classified as a pilot, and I wanted to be a bombardier or a navigator. So they called me in. I have to step back. We went to Keesler Field in Mississippi for basic training, and it looked like we were going to go back to Niagara. And I didn't want to go back to Niagara as a cadet, having served there as a professor. And Niagara's a cold place anyway. I wanted to go to a warmer climate. Well, I was walking past the house, and it said, "Home of the Commanding General." Now, don't forget, I was a private, and I didn't even know what channel of command meant. I just knocked on his door and said, "I'd like to speak to the general." private. The lady was very cordial and said, Henry, or whatever his name was, there's a young man here wants to see you. And he was very abrupt and not very cordial. He said, young man, did you ever hear of the Channel Command? I said, no, sir, I don't know what you're talking about, sir. Well, anyway, tell me your problem. He listened. He said, who's the head of your outfit? I said, I didn't even know. I said, well, Corporal Katz, Saul Katz. Thank you. Well, Corporal Saul Katz didn't last very long. Forgot to include that in his curriculum. Well, lo and behold, I wasn't sent to Niagara. The general did something about it and sent me to Eau Claire, Wisconsin. It was a great, great place. It was these Scandinavians, Norwegians, and Swedes that worked as lumberjacks in the Ward lumber type enterprises, etc. Well, we had a hell of a flood in Eau Claire that year, and all of the Neeson huts on campus where we lived were all flooded out. And the only ones that were comfortable with the band, they were up on the second story of the garage at Eau Claire. The cymbal player had developed an appendicitis attack and had to go into the hospital, and they needed a cymbal player, and I was a bugler in the American Legion Fife and Drum Corps. Never played cymbals in my life, but when you're in the Army, you do some things that are ripe, and I went into the bandmaster and said, I understand you need a cymbalist. He said, I'm ready for you. Can't play? Yeah, I was okay, fine. Bring your stuff, bring your gear up, go upstairs, etc. So I went to visit with the bass drummer, and I said, what do I do? He said, well, every time you see me whack the bass drum, you whack the cymbals. Well, I said, that's easy enough. And I had known some of the songs, the Thunderer, Bells of St. Mary, and all the like, and we did very well. Graduation time at Eau Claire. Rickenbacker is the speaker. He's on the platform. We march by and review the band. Now, I don't know what kind of cymbals they were, but the right hand and the left hand are different cymbals, and as you hit them, they tighten. Well, this dumb cymbalist who is not up to snuff with the cymbals had them in the wrong hand. And as I hit the cymbals, they loosened and loosened and loosened. Hard to believe, but one of them became a boomerang, left my hands, went shooting across the platform, missed Rickenbacker by yards. And I didn't know what to do. I stood at attention at the end of the platform as the band went by. Rickenbacker goes up to the microphone, graduation day, will I make it? And said, I was on a dinghy, an ocean raft in the Pacific for 23 days or so?
God, yeah.
He said, and I thought I was a goner, and here I am. And some SOB cadet wants to decapitate me.
What a story.
So I was wondering what would happen. So I walked up and apologized. And he was very, very cordial and very nice. He said, good luck to you. He said, cadet, he said, I understand. Don't worry about it. Go away. Enjoy your day, etc. And I'm leaving. I'm going down the steps of the platform, and he says, by the way, Cadet Salese, in this Air Force, never lose your head. Just a final greeting.
What a guy.
I met him later on.
Did you really?
Yeah, we talked about it. I met him in the presence of Doolittle. Doolittle was running my outfit.
You're dropping some pretty high-powered names here.
Oh, you have no idea. I've known many, many important people. I have a letter here from Malcolm Wilson that I was going to show you. So many.
We may have to come back here for chapters 2, 3, and 4. This very often happens in our program.
So the Eglin Air Force Base is in Destin, where we spend our winter vacations, and right near the water's edge is Bacon by the Sea during wartime. It was a watering hole for the high-ranking officers of Eglin, and Doolittle and his crowd at that point had worked on the dropping of the atomic bomb on Tokyo, or on the Japanese islands. You know, the two cities that had been selected there. And they worked it all out after a few scotches on a white linen tablecloth at Bacon's restaurant. And when the evening was over, they went back to Eglin Air Force, leaving the white tablecloth behind with all of the top secrets on the dropping of the bombs. What do you think of that?
That's a story I had not heard before.
And Bacon decided that he would do something about it, and being the good patriot that he was, wrapped it up neatly and brought it to headquarters at Eglin. They had formed an organization after that, all of those that were involved in this, and they bought a very expensive, maybe $1,000 bottle of something, and each year they meet on the same day, and they turn over the glasses of those that have died. And of course, the last man that lives will enjoy this bottle.
That's a great story. That tablecloth should be in the Smithsonian.
It is.
Oh, is it really?
It is. It is.
Oh,
It is.
I haven't seen it there, but
Yeah,
it
that's what
certainly
they
is
say.
a perfect
It
place
is.
for it.
It is. That's what I understand.
Isn't that
Now,
amazing?
lo and behold, Doolittle was, you know, these men, regardless of rank, if you're in the Air Force, you have to fly. You have to fly at least one mission a month, and if you don't get your combat pay. That's probably why poor Glenn Miller died. I don't know why he needed that money, but he flew in a small Piper Cub at ice, or something resembling a Piper Cub, at a time when there was lots of ice and bad weather, and they say that he went down in Jersey or Guernsey or one of those islands. Actually, there's a second theory that says the B-17s were returning, and it was an aborted mission, and they let their bombs go over the English Channel, and they certainly wouldn't see his tiny little plane at 4,000 feet. And he might have gone down in a shower of bombs, friendly fire. But
Who
one or
knows?
the other.
Who knows?
Well, who knows?
What a guy. We're unfortunately, this tape is probably about to run out, but before it does, I want to tell one story, and then you must invite us back because we've got more chapters to do, if you don't mind.
No,
But I want you to tell briefly the story of your tutoring session with a certain cardinal in New York.
I sat in the faculty room one day with a Professor Germino. He's since deceased. And he said to me, I read something in the paper about, in fact, I went to visit him at St. John's. I had already left St. John's, but went back maybe to pick up some material of mine and went in to see some of my friends. He says the new Archbishop of New York is looking for a Spanish tutor. He says, why don't you apply? I says, I can't. I'm too busy with Como. Goodbye, Gene, etc. Well, about a week or 10 days later, on a hot August day, I get a phone call. My wife answers the phone and says, it's for you, Nick. I picked it up. He said, are you Professor Salese? I said, yes, I am. Are you the author of Pan y Mantequilla, bread and butter, Spanish? I said, yes, I am. He said, well, somebody gave me the book, and I think it's a great book. And then the thought occurred to me, why don't I get tutored by the man that wrote the book? How would you like to teach the Archbishop of New York Spanish? I remembered my conversation with Germino. Germino's voice sounded just like,
And you thought he was
Cardinal.
pulling a joke on you?
see? And I thought he was pulling my leg. And I hate to say this, maybe I should just leave it blank. I said, cut the, and you can fill in the word yourself.
Yeah,
What are
we
you
know.
doing to me, Gene? He says, this is the Archbishop O'Connor of New York. I said, oh, I'm sorry, Your Excellency, Your Highness, Your love. Oh, boy, that was a rough one. He says, would you entertain the thought of teaching me Spanish? I said, absolutely. He said, okay, meet me at Dunwoody Seminary up here in Yonkers. And well, I met him in Yonkers, hot day, tall fellow. He was an admiral in the United States Navy. He says, we have to work with air conditioning because I have an asthmatic condition. But he says, you better be good, because there's probably 1,000 people that would like to have this job just for publicity's sake. And I remember teaching.
And you said, but I'm the only one here.
That's right. I remember teaching high-ranking officers when we couldn't fly in Europe. They wanted to learn Spanish, so they'd go to Spain and enjoy a weekend, and with the señoritas and the good Spanish wines. I said, there may be 1 million that know the language better than me, but they're not here.
Not here.
Well, he liked that. He says, I'm going to like you. We're in there. And I said, well, I guess we'll work from about now until noon. He says, yeah, and then we'll have a little something to eat. And he says, we'll go on until late afternoon, 4 and 5 o'clock. I said, once a week? No, he says,
Every day.
complete immersion period for 30 days. I said, oh my God, I'll have to check with the governor. The governor says, Nick, why don't you make this your vacation? And if you can make all of your speaking engagements on the weekend, etc. Well, we worked it out so that there'd be no problem, and the citizens of New York wouldn't be deprived of my services, etc. And besides, I represented him all over the country because I thought he was going to be the new president of the United States. So I got plenty of vacation time traveling with our car at New York State expense all over the world, VFW conventions, American Legion, DAV, you name it, AMVETS. I represented Como in all these situations. And I have to tell you about one more before we close. Well, anyway, the picture was one in which he would get off. It was completely in Spanish the entire time. I insisted. And of course, I got to know a lot about him because he had to talk about his life. And of course, he told me how he had celebrated Mass on one side of the valley, and then he had to go through a place that was filled with snipers, and he might be ambushed. And he always picked a sergeant that had hash marks way up to here with a machine gun. He remembers his second Louis 90-day wonder wanting to come along. And he says, no, we don't want to put your life in jeopardy. Well, the guy insists. He gets into the back Jeep of the car and seat of the car in the Jeep, and they go on, and sure enough, they were ambushed. This guy didn't even bring a pistol. Didn't bring anything like that. I remember there was a knock on the door, and his valet said, you have a phone call. Is it from the Pope? He was waiting for to become a prince of the church, a cardinal. No, it's from the governor of New York State, Mario Cuomo. Tell him I'm busy with my tutor. That's my boss. Then he gives me a shot. Poor valet comes in with some cheese and crackers. He's on a diet. That was the great meal I was going to have at the seminary. And he says, did you ever see a cuter waitress in your life? He had a good sense of humor. Very good sense of humor. He introduced me to Mary Alice Williams. Why is that important? Mary Alice Williams was doing research to try to determine who had more education under the GI Bill than any other veteran in the United States of America. And her research pointed in my direction. She called me and said, how much education did you get from the GI Bill? I said, 5 college degrees, 2 foreign universities, and a library of books. Wow. She said, I'm coming to see you. I said, fine. Like Gordon, she showed up with her TV crew, and they determined that I was the veteran in the United States that got more education from the GI Bill than any other veteran in the United States of America. And I was truly, truly grateful. And I have a documentary on film that my wife has set up for you fellas to enjoy when this interview is over. And before I leave, I not only wrote that one book, Pani Mantequilla, but I wrote a whole series of textbooks and dedicated one to Mario. There's the picture of the book, and there's the book.
Aha.
This was my first book at Columbia University, and I think I received the first doctorate in education from Teachers College. Actually, I had done it in the graduate school, got 60 credits, was going to get a PhD. The director was Dionis. He says, "You're a gringo and you're too young," which was telling me, "You're not going to get a PhD from me, buddy." So I went across the street to Teachers College, same university, and I had to do 30 credits more, and I picked up a doctorate in education. And this is my, it's an old manuscript of the medieval period, the literature and civilization of Spain. What I did is I wove in 2 subjects so that the boys returning to college who had little time could get out more efficiently, economically, and that's that. I decided to write a grammar book for teachers, a textbook for those majoring in Spanish, with all of the rules in the foreign language. There is an English word in this book, Gramática Moderna. It also went into 2nd edition. There it is, same book. This is the first copy of Pani Mantequilla that we used to teach the Archbishop. It's a technique that we don't have the time for it, but it's more, in one word, it's a Berlitz presentation. Some of the professors look down their noses at me, and now, of course, that's the way it should go. From the Los Angeles Times, I picked up the series of Love Is cartoons that really attracted all the female teachers. This book paid for this chalet.
But you know, the end of that story with the cardinal is you sat on a podium with him and watched him give an address in Spanish, didn't you? Totally.
At the end of the month, he invited me to come to a special, they had a kind of a Pan American Day celebration. They had the youngsters all dressed up in their traditional uniforms. He walks up to the pulpit, had me in the front, and without a note, without a card, without any reference at all, he gave the most moving homily in Spanish.
Flawless.
Impeccable.
Flawless.
Impeccable. And when he got all through, he went like this to me and stepped down.
Isn't it beautiful?
But during that speech, he turned to the congregation and said, "I went to Rome. I am now a cardinal. Mario Como, I'm glad to see you here, but you weren't in Rome, and I didn't miss you." And everybody oohed and said, where is this leading to? I didn't miss you, Mario, because I had your wonderful wife with me, Matilda, who accompanied me all through this experience. I liked Matilda, just like the cardinal liked Matilda, and each Valentine's Day, I would award her a love poem from the Veterans Nursing Home. Now, you know, when we chatted on the telephone, that I met Dole in Washington, D.C., looking for some monies. He certainly wasn't going to give it to me as part of the Democratic administration of Como. But when he realized that I was the only Republican in his cabinet, he opened all the doors, and I picked up $18 million for that Veterans Nursing Home on your campus of your alma mater.
That's Stony Brook.
That's Stony Brook. I got hell. I called the mansion at Albany, and Como was very perturbed, and I couldn't understand why. I'm bringing $18 million into the coffers of New York State, and he's perturbed. I didn't know that he had to match the 18
Oh,
million
yeah,
bucks.
matching funds, of course. I love it. I love it.
This is the only book I did in Italian. This is a revision of now this is an audiolingual Spanish. I invented the language laboratory in this country, along with others. There it is right there. There's a picture of it right there.
That's wonderful, yep. We only got 2 minutes left on this tape, so we're going to make it very brief.
Primitive laboratory, And this is a book that I did for commercial Spanish for people that are interested in business.
Isn't that great?
And I wandered all over the place with no rhyme or reason except to fill in the blanks.
And we're so glad you ended up here in the North Country, and we're going to wrap up this wonderful program
Thanks to
downstairs and outside, and we'll say goodbye, and you have to bring us back. The coffee was good.
you. Anytime.
Thanks,
Anytime.
Nick. As you can tell, Nick Salese is an effervescent, passionate human being who has done many things in his lifetime. We didn't even begin to take a walk down Nick Salese Lane in our program today. So there probably will be another chapter. I want you to know he handed me a portfolio before we left, including at least 6,000 other names we should have mentioned and things that he's done. So maybe there will be a chapter number 2 in the Nick Salese story. We thank you for watching this program, and we invite you to stay with us anytime we broadcast our little corner. And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.